Good evening, Philippines and the world. Today is Monday, September 7, 2020. I am Jorlene Delgado. Join us as we deliver today's top stories around the country and in other parts of the world.
We are also seen in 1,935 satellite monitoring centers nationwide and via live streaming worldwide through the UNTV News and Rescue social media accounts and our website, untvweb.com. I am William Theo.
First in the news, President Rodrigo Duterte has just given a public address earlier. Here's Rosalie Cos to tell us why live. Yes, Rosalie.
President Rodrigo Duterte in his public address said that quarantine restrictions are a big help to combat the spread of COVID-19 infections with less movement of people. One important development also is the awareness of the public. People follow that meant a lot and contributed to what is happening now, and there's flattening of cases. Local chief executives played a vital role in the COVID-19 response. President Duterte salutes them for doing their duty well. But despite the positive development, we should still be vigilant, he said. The president underscored that the lessening of contamination is not because COVID-19 is gone. It's there floating around us, but what has happened is that people are following protocols. He highlighted that wearing a face mask is one important factor. The key to winning against COVID-19 is the collective resolve of the people to be healthy and follow protocols. President Duterte also made mention of his decision to grant absolute pardon to U.S. Marine Lance Corporal Joseph Scott Pemberton. He said he's not favoring anybody, either Pemberton or Laudes family. He underscored that the basic is when you talked about good behavior, everything will be accounted for. That's part of you being in prison. And it's not Pemberton's fault if there's no record and if there's no computation. He said we should allow him the good character presumption. He told Executive Secretary Salvador Medialdea and Justice Secretary Menato Guevara it's his decision to pardon. He said, quote, "Correct me if I'm wrong, you have not treated Pemberton fairly," unquote. And that pardon cannot be questioned very well. Meanwhile, Justice Secretary Guevara gave an update on their investigation against PhilHealth corruption and anomalies. He said by September 14, they shall be able to submit their reports to President as well as the recommendations, including the possible filing of criminal and administrative cases against PhilHealth officials and personnel involved in the corruption and anomalies. President Duterte, on the other hand, expressed his full trust and confidence to Health Secretary Duque amid the PhilHealth controversies. He advised the health chief not to resign. In the end, Harleen, National Task Force Chief Implementer Secretary Carlito Galvez has recommended to President Duterte to place Bacolod City and Lanao del Sur under stricter community quarantine, which is modified enhanced community quarantine or MPCQ. But we're still awaiting for the details if the president has approved it. Harleen?
So, Rosalie, as the president is in Manila, what are his schedules?
Well, Harleen, we just received a statement from the palace that the president was able to talk to outgoing U.S. Ambassador Sung Kim. And also he had a telephone conversation with outgoing Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. So the president is in Manila. He has full schedule of meetings as well as phone conversations.
Thank you so much, Rosalie Cos, for that report. Meanwhile, some senators have weighed in on the granting of absolute pardon to U.S. Marine Lance Corporal Joseph Scott Pemberton. Senator Kiko Pangilinan described the move as a questionable and controversial pardon that helps to redirect and divert the public's attention away from what he calls incompetent, corrupt, and failing COVID-19 campaign. Meanwhile, for Senator Amy Marcos, the move shows that the relationship of of the two countries is very deep and very cordial. According to the lady senator, the role of the president in issuing a pardon is to prevent any future disagreeing issues that the opposition would try to exploit. Marcos adds they thank President Duterte for laying the issue to rest.
The daily case count of COVID-19 cases in the country continues to decrease. According to UP Octa research, if this continues in 2 months, it is possible that quarantine restrictions are eased. But the health department reminds the public not to be complacent despite reports of flattened curve. Our health correspondent, Aiko Miguel, details why.
Not only the single-day case record continues to decrease, but also the positivity rate in the country continues to decline as an effect of the implemented modified enhanced community quarantine. According to UP Octa research, quarantine restrictions may be eased in the next 2 months with improved records.
It has to be sustained for at least 1 to 2 months before we can maybe relax further yung measures natin, yung quarantine measures, because we have to reduce the number of cases. We're still getting 2,000 cases per day. That is still a big number of cases for NCR. So that's why we have to work together. Medyo nakikita na natin yung light at the end of the tunnel. If we can sustain this.
According to Dr. Guido David of the UP Octa research team, in the previous months there had been more than 3,000 to 4,000 cases reported daily, but in the past weeks, the DOH recorded almost 3,000 or less. It is also a good news that some areas like the National Capital Region and Calabarzon are seen flattening the curve of the disease. According to Dr. David, the flattening of the curve is a definition of low transmission of COVID-19. Currently, the reproduction number in the country is 0.94, compared with the reproduction number in the past weeks at 0.99. This means a person positive for COVID-19 can only infect another person, compared to 2 people infected by 1 COVID positive in the previous months. But according to the DOH, people should also be cautious in using the term flattening of the curve.
Iniiwasan nga ho namin sabihin yan dahil ayaw natin na magkaroon ng complacency among our population. When we talk about flattening the curve, it is spreading the number of cases in a longer period of time so that our health system will not be overwhelmed. Pag tinignan po natin yung graph dyan, ayaw natin na magsaspike yung graph ng mataas over a shorter period of time. Ang gusto natin, humaba yung period of time para dun sa mga kasong darating, para yung ating health system nakakaagapay. That is the meaning of flattening the curve.
The DOH also reported that the health system in the country has now been coping after the 2-week MECQ in some areas with high cases. As a proof, the critical care utilization in the country is no longer in the warning zone. The UP Octa research team has a projection of 330,000 COVID-19 cases in the country by the end of September. Aiko Miguel, UNTV News and Rescue. We serve the people. We give glory to God.
Meanwhile, the country's Department of Health says that 1,383 new cases were reported today based on tests done by 88 out of 115 operational laboratories. That raises the total confirmed cases of coronavirus infection in the Philippines to 238,727. The National Capital Region reported the most new cases with 525, followed by Laguna with 137. The total active cases have decreased from last week, now only below 50,000. A total of more than 2.6 million individuals in the country have been tested for coronavirus infection. We have lost 15 more patients, but through our fervent prayers, medical interventions and sacrifices of our medical frontliners, 230 more people have won their battle against the invisible enemy. That brings the total number of recoveries nationwide to 184,906. Thanks be to God.
The United Nations Children's Fund, or UNICEF, will lead the global procurement and supply of COVID-19 vaccines. The aim is to ensure that all countries have safe, fast and equitable access to initial doses when they are available, the agency has announced. According to the UNICEF chief Henrietta Fore, this is an all-hands-on-deck partnership between governments, manufacturers, and multilateral partners to continue the high-stakes fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. Also, according to UNICEF, the vaccine procurement and distribution effort involving over 170 economies has the potential to become the world's largest and faster ever operation of its kind. UNICEF is the world's largest single vaccine buyer, procuring more than 2 billion doses of various vaccines annually for routine immunization and outbreak response on behalf of nearly 100 countries.
Let's now take a closer look at the updated count of coronavirus cases around the world. The COVID-19 pandemic has now reached a total of over 27.1 million confirmed cases in 188 countries, regions, and sovereignty. That's after more than 231,000 new cases were reported globally since yesterday. Over 4,000 COVID-19 patients have died in the last 24 hours across various countries. The fast-spreading disease has claimed more than 883,000 lives, while recoveries around the globe surpass 18.1 million, thanks be to God. The Department of Agriculture, or DA, lifts the temporary ban on mechanically deboned meat, or MDM, of poultry from Brazil. Now the importation of this commodity is allowed, but subject to certain conditions. For one, only foreign meat establishments without COVID-19 positive meat plant workers shall be allowed to export poultry meat. Also, poultry products must carry safe handling label. The Agriculture Department shall confiscate all shipments not complying with the conditions stated in the DA order.
Due to declining water level in Pantabangan Dam, the Department of Agriculture and the National Irrigation Administration will undertake cloud seeding operations in central Luzon. Agriculture Secretary William Dar has instructed the Bureau of Soils and Water Management to begin the cloud seeding operations to induce rains over parts of Region 3, where the bulk of the rice areas are in their critical reproductive stage. Through cloud seeding, we can ensure a respectable rice harvest in central Luzon, particularly in Nueva Ecija, Pampanga, Bulacan, and Tarlac, according to Secretary Dar. Central Luzon remains as the country's rice granary and main source of the staple for Metro Manila and other rice deficit areas in Luzon.
Meanwhile, the Department of Foreign Affairs reports that the Japanese Coast Guard conducts aerial search operations today in relation to the missing Panamanian flag vessel in Japan. According to the DFA, search by patrol boat is not possible at this time as the area is still pounded by gusty winds. The DFA remains hopeful that the other Filipino seafarers will soon be found. All authorities ensure the Philippine Embassy in Tokyo, the Philippine Consulate General in Osaka, and the Philippine Overseas Labor Office, or POLO, continue to monitor and coordinate the situation with the Japanese Coast Guard ship owner and the manning agency to extend all appropriate support for the Filipino seafarers and their families.
Now, here's a glimpse of what's the weather like in parts of the country. The Intertropical Convergence Zone, or ITCZ, is affecting Mindanao. State Weather Bureau Pagasa says the ITCZ will cause cloudy skies with scattered rain showers and thunderstorms over Mindanao and the eastern and central Visayas. Meanwhile, Metro Manila and the rest of the country will experience partly cloudy to cloudy skies with isolated rain showers due to the ITCZ or localized thunderstorms. No tropical cyclone advisory is issued.
And for the news abroad, here's Elsie Marcos reporting live from Auckland, New Zealand.
A month ago, New Zealand delivered the news no one wanted to hear. After 102 days of no new COVID-19 cases in the country, suddenly 4 members of a South Auckland family had tested positive. Within the weeks, the cluster earmarked as the Auckland August cluster had swollen to become the single largest connected group of COVID-19 victims in the country, with 159 men, women, and children testing positive. Despite drastic measures to halt travel in and out of the Auckland region and severe personal movement and gathering restrictions, the tally surpassed the earlier Bluff Wedding and Mary's College clusters that had stopped at 98 and 96 respectively. Then last week, the fast-growing citywide cluster that Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern warned would have a long tail took a deadly turn, claiming the lives of 2 men in 24 hours. To date, 17 children under 9 and 34 aged between 10 and 19 have COVID-19. Over the past month, hospitals have treated a handful of patients needing wards and intensive care. Compounding the cluster spread is the infection through churches. At least 5 different congregations affecting hundreds of families across South and Central Auckland. There are now 1,425 cases of COVID-19 in New Zealand, both imported and community spread. Half the COVID deaths remain linked to the Rosewood Rest Home cluster in Christchurch, where 12 residents died. While new cases are expected to continue to arrive in New Zealand from returnees, a combination of managed isolation and compulsory testing is being lauded as successful, keeping potential community transmission in check at the border. Prime Minister Scott Morrison was struck by the threshold as outlined in the step-by-step approach by Victoria Premier Daniel Andrews in his Stage 4 exit roadmap plan. Joining us tonight is one of our correspondents in Australia, Early Briones, to tell us why. Live. Earl?
LC, Premier Andrews announced a further 2 weeks extension of Stage 4 lockdown with some flexibilities such as adjusting the commencement of curfew from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., as well as moving from 1 hour of exercise to 2 hours. Victoria's original Stage 4 lockdown was meant to end this week on September 13 and now moved to September 28. In the recently announced roadmap for reopening Victoria, the first step is planned to take effect end of this week from September 13 at 11:59 p.m., with some minor adjustments on the current curfew from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., as well as moving from 1 hour of exercise to 2 hours. Movements are still limited to a 5-kilometer distance from residents. While the second step is planned to take effect on September 28 at 11:59 p.m., 2 weeks after its original end date of the state's Stage 4 lockdown, the move from first step to second step is dependent if the state will reach an average of 30 to 50 cases in Metro Melbourne over previous 14 days with public health advice regarding transmission. Under Step 2, public gathering of 5 will now be allowed from 2 different households, childcare centers to reopen, hospitality remains on takeaway and delivery only. Shopping outside for essential remains to be limited to 1 person per household. From October 26, to move from second step to third step is planned if the state can reach less than 5 new cases on a 14-day average, as well as less than 5 cases of unknown transmissions. Under the third step, the state plans to abolish its curfew and no more restriction on reasons to leave home, as well as no distance limitation. Public gatherings can then increase to 10. Interstate travels will be allowed except to areas with high community transmission rate. Household bubbles will be allowed, meaning resident can nominate 5 visitors from 1 household. Remote learning continues for adult education, and policy on work from home still applies. Outdoor restaurants will be allowed to have seated service up to 10 people, while retail shops to start operating. The last step after Step 3 will be implemented from November 23. There should be 0 new cases of COVID-19 in the span of 14 days. Interstate travels will be allowed with no restrictions. LC?
Earl, what is the confidence level and reaction of Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison with the four-step exit roadmap plan that was announced by Premier Daniel Andrews over the weekend? Does this coincide with the overall plans made for the country by the federal government?
Elsie, the seemingly strict and complex four-step plan for the Victorian government has triggered Prime Minister Scott Morrison to say that in order to gain confidence, Victoria needs to strengthen its contact tracing capability, and that the gold standard to follow was that of New South Wales. He further commented that Australia closed is not success, Australia open is success, and asked for a more detailed plan to be reviewed, as he believed that state's current exit roadmap does not provide substantial action plan in order to suppress the virus, such as stronger contact tracing. Elsie?
Thank you, Early, for that report. Aussies will be among the first in the world to get a free coronavirus vaccine. Another correspondent from Australia, Marvi Delphine, will tell us why live. Marvi?
Elsie, that's right. Aussies will be among the first in the world to get a free coronavirus vaccine. That's under a 1.7 billion Australian dollars supply and production agreement between the Australian government and pharmaceutical companies. Under the agreement, the University of Oxford through AstraZeneca and the University of Queensland through CSL will provide more than 84.8 million vaccine doses for the Australian population. The manufacture of these vaccines will be almost entirely done in Melbourne, with early access to 3.8 million doses of the University of Oxford vaccine expected in January and February 2021. Each person would have a dose of one vaccine followed by a second dose of the same one within a few weeks. First to get the vaccine would be people most at risk of the coronavirus and frontline health workers. In his announcement of the sovereign vaccine strategy in a press conference today, Prime Minister Scott Morrison has urged caution over the delivery of a potential vaccine, saying that both vaccines would need to be proven safe and effective and meet all necessary regulatory requirements prior to being made available to the public. Prime Minister Morrison also said that lockdowns and borders are not signs of success in dealing with COVID-19, underlining the critical importance of a vaccine program. The University of Oxford through AstraZeneca vaccine is leading in the world, currently in its phase 3 trial of 30,000 people. To date, it has generated strong immune responses with no significant safety concerns. Preliminary results are expected to be available in December. On the other hand, University of Queensland recently announced that preclinical testing showed their vaccine is promising and already effective in animal models. It is now in the early phase 1 clinical trial. If both vaccines are successful, not only will Aussies benefit, as the Prime Minister has committed to ensuring early access to as many as 30 million vaccines to be donated in countries in the Pacific, as well as regional partners in Southeast Asia. Elsie?
Marvi, as we can see, the Australian government is a strong supporter of immunization. Does this mean that it will be mandatory to vaccinate?
Elsie, while the government supports immunization, it is not mandatory and individuals maintain the option to choose not to vaccinate. The Australian government is a strong supporter of immunization in that it is a safe and effective way to prevent the spread of many diseases in the community that can cause hospitalization, serious ongoing health conditions, or even death. Health Minister Greg Hunt confirmed this in today's press conference and added that any decisions regarding vaccines will be based on the advice of the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunization and other experts, and will be contingent on a vaccine meeting all requirements with regard to testing and safety. Elsie?
Thank you, Marvi, for that report. Let's now take a closer look at the updated count of coronavirus cases in countries worst hit by the pandemic. The USA has so far reported almost 6.3 million total confirmed COVID-19 cases, while India is now the country with the second most case load around the world, surpassing the cumulative cases of Brazil. India has over 4.2 million cases, while Brazil has more than 4.3 million total confirmed cases. Data shows that India has been reporting 5-digit daily cases. Meanwhile, good news for New Zealanders. New Zealand ranks second safest country after Germany, according to a newly released survey. Germany is the safest country in the world when it comes to COVID-19, followed closely by New Zealand. The ranking places South Korea third, while Switzerland, which was first, has dropped back to fourth, and Japan is fifth, according to Forbes Online. Australia and China are sixth and seventh, respectively. The ranking of the safest country in the world for COVID-19 was first released by Deep Knowledge Group in June. The ranking was not just about how many infections there are at present or how many deaths COVID-19 has caused in each country. Whether a country has been hit hard by COVID-19 or not is taken into consideration. But also factored into the rankings was whether there is political will and social acceptance of quarantine and lockdown measures. It also considered whether the national and local governments cooperate well. A nation has good monitoring and detection and a strong medical system. The United States ranked a distant 55th, behind Hungary, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Bulgaria. The most dangerous nations for COVID according to the ranking were Somaliland, South Sudan, Afghanistan, and Mali. Deep Knowledge Group's new COVID-19 Special Analytical Case Study is designated to classify, analyze, and rank the economic, social, and health stability achieved by each of the 250 countries and regions included in its analysis, as well as the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats or risks that they present in the battle against COVID-19. And those are the reasons behind the news here in New Zealand and in other parts of the globe. Back to you, Will.
Thank you, Elsie Marcos, live from Auckland, New Zealand.
And history made. Denis Shapovalov becomes the first Canadian male in a singles draw to make the US Open Quarterfinals in the Open era. He beat David Goffin of Belgium in 4 sets on Sunday. The 12th-seeded Shapovalov toppled Goffin in the 4th round of the Grand Slam tournament to advance. Shapovalov will face number 20 seed Pablo Carreno Busta of Spain in the quarters. The Spaniard got into the final 8 when number 1 seed Novak Djokovic was defaulted, the tennis equivalent of an ejection from their 4th round match after he accidentally hit a line judge with a tennis ball. Djokovic has apologized for his action. And for those watching us on YouTube, please click the subscribe button you see on the right side of your screen and ring the bell for notification. You may also follow us on Facebook. And those are the reasons behind the news, September 7, 2020. I am Harleen Delgado.
Because we need to know, we will always ask why. I am William Theo. We serve the people. We give glory to God.